recording. Yes, so Zoom now for legal reasons. That's to tell everybody that this message is being recorded, and that it is. So, hi, Andy, you're on the record.
Excellent. Thanks for having me, Sean. Glad to be here.
Oh, no, thank you. The genesis of this whole series of episodes is basically your credit. You and our brief email exchange solidified my efforts to actually put these on. So we'll tell everybody why you're here in just a moment. But first, thank you very much for doing this. Second, thanks for everybody for tuning in. Welcome to Did You Know That? ? The channel where I get to interview interesting people about interesting and sometimes annoying topics. And this one just might be both for the viewers, because there's going to be some different lists here today. Again, for those of you just tuning in, my name is Sean O'Rourke, if you didn't know that already. And when I'm not interviewing folks, I'm basically preparing companies to be hacked. And I started this channel almost a year ago, and I've had some very interesting topics, but this one's going to fire people up. And so I'm glad you're tuning in. If you haven't already done so, hit the subscribe button down below with the bell, and you'll get notified as new content comes on to the channel. And Andy, why don't you tell the good folks who you are, what you do, and then we'll get started.
Sure. Andy Schulkind, company is Andigo, as it says somewhere around here.
Yeah.
We build websites and do digital marketing. We exist because at this point in the evolution of the internet, B2B buyers are usually somewhere around 3/4 of the way through their buying process before they'll ever invite you into the conversation, which means you're not even going to be on their short list if you don't have content out there for them to interact with, for them to get to know you a little bit, for them to have some level of comfort with you, for you. So that's what we do. We do it mostly for B2B companies. We do it for companies between $2 and $50 million. And we've been doing it for long enough to have seen a lot of different content trends come and go. So right. I'll leave it at that without dating myself too badly.
Exactly. And guess what? Usually I use that as a segue to tell people to start interviewing people, but your business and what you do has absolutely nothing to do with what we're going to talk about today. Well, it does in a way. It's artistic, but so Andy and I apparently are brothers from different mothers because we're both avid squash players, both avid Batman fans, and for the sake of this episode, also huge into music. And today, Andy and I have the unenviable task of listing out our top 10 musical acts. Now, here's a caveat, and Andy and I briefly touched on this before I hit the record button. This stands as of the recording of this episode. If we recorded this episode next week, the list might be slightly different, but it's as of the recording of this episode. So if anybody wants to ring in, comments are below. We want to hear what you liked about our lists and what you would have added or what your top 10 would be. And Andy, you said it pretty well. This was really difficult. Figuring out the 10 and then figuring out the top 5. I finished just about an hour before we started recording. So
I get to go first. Is that right?
You get to go first. I should have done a better segue than leaving you hanging here. But we start with number 10, and your number 10 would be
Chet Atkins.
Chet Atkins. Okay.
Yeah. So I'll give you the background there. I'm as will become apparent as we go through this list, I don't just love music, I love playing music. And I've been playing the guitar since I was since I was less than 10. It's been a long, long time. And I really ought to be a lot better than I am, but that's another story entirely. And when I was just getting started, my dad tried to turn me on to Chet Atkins. And I wasn't having it, right? Like, this is boring. This is, it's not rock and roll. And of course, the kiss of death, right? Your father, recommends immediately it's going to be bad.
It's dad music.
As I grew, more mature. And as I, grew up, sort of musically, I realized this guy, he did everything, 50 or 60 or 70 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm still trying to do, right? He plays this beautiful melody. He's got a real groove going all at the same time. And then, he adds in some really cool harmonies to the whole thing. And he just keeps it growing. So he's, I'm not the only one he's a huge influence on. Tommy Emmanuel, if you've ever heard of him, he's
sure.
an Australian guy, just a little bit of a showman, but he's, like the second coming kind of,
right.
That kind of. And he's one of the 3 or 4 people on the planet who Chet Atkins bestowed with the certified guitar player type EP. Actually, Tommy Emmanuel, I think he's got that embedded, or whatever you call that, on his guitar fretboard. But Chet Atkins is big.
Well, I have to ask, because some of the viewers might not know who you are, but you are a southpaw, at least on the squash court. Are you a southpaw guitarist?
I am not, and
okay.
That was, not to get too deep into, pop psychology of my youth, but I do not play golf because my father wouldn't let me play left-handed. I think because he didn't want to have to pay for a set of lefty clubs, but he wouldn't let me play guitar left-handed either, which thank heavens, because buying guitars is, an expensive hobby as it is. And if you play left-handed, there are so fewer choices out there.
Yes, so but then you would be, Jimi Hendrix-esque
right.
in that regard.
Just upside down, yeah.
Right. Okay, so that's a good top 10 and our number 10. And I have to say, my number 10, and by the way, as everybody knows, I always have my lists here and whatnot. My number 10 is probably 180 degrees opposite of Chet Atkins. And it's an electronica group called VNV Nation. And the VNV stands for Victory Not Violence Nation. And I discovered them through pirated MP3s at a job that I had in the late 90s, early 2000s. And I had bootleg copies of a live performance they did in New York City, and absolutely just became obsessed with them and have every recording I think they've ever done, and have seen them live every time they come to New York because they come so rarely. And so that is my number 10 on the list. They would be higher, but some of their more recent albums I think have kind of tailed off. So they dropped down to number 10.
Still out there. They were out there in the 90s and they're still out there now.
Yeah. And really, it's just one guy, Ronan Harris, and he travels when he goes live. He travels basically with a synth drummer and 2 guys on computers running all the music, and then he sings and whatnot. But they did do 1 year with the release of one album that had some serious drumming in it, and real drumming. They actually brought local drummers on to the stage to do a couple of songs that were heavy on drum fills and whatnot. And that was spectacular because it was the first time they'd used live musicians any of their tours that I had ever seen. And so it was great.
So with a band like that, I'm always curious if they've been around that long and you're going to see them live now. My first question is, what's the audience like? Is their audience all the original fans from 25 years ago? Or?
They've captured some younger fans. Obviously, it's still more the hardcore folks, but there are younger fans. A lot in the 90s and the early 2000s, they were labeled sort of in that goth mode, but they really weren't. And so it's been interesting to see the evolution, and also how much older I've gotten over the past 2+ decades. So, but yeah, they have captured some new fans.
That's cool. That's good.
Okay, number 9.
Number 9, going in a completely different direction, although another guy that a lot of people consider a guitar god, Frank Zappa.
Oh.
Yeah. I started listening to Apostrophe and Live at the Fillmore East and just ran from there. And those are still, maybe because they were the first 2 that I listened to, and I don't know why I listened to them together, but they were the first 2 I listened to, and they're still, I think, my favorites. I really do love them. I have to give a big shout out to a friend of mine from high school, Dave Turner, who died in a car crash probably 25 years ago or something. And he, I don't think he introduced me to them. It was another friend of mine from high school, but he was such a huge Zappa head that I couldn't not pay attention to him. Because I remember in the beginning, I thought, it was also, the Weasels Rip My Flesh and, these weird song titles and Flo and Eddie part of the band. Like, this is all like, this is like a novelty act, is it? And I'm like, no, he's a serious musician with something serious to say. So,
well, and that's the thing with Zappa, though. You either love him or you hate him. I don't think there's an in between with him, but I was never a huge fan. But from a technical standpoint, not only himself, but every musician that he ever had on any album I've ever listened to or song I've listened to has been impeccable. I mean, the music and the craftsmanship of the song itself, you may not like it, but the way it's structured and it builds and whatnot is pretty remarkable. And Fillmore East, just some of the jam portions are unbelievable when you listen to them.
Yeah, killer band, absolutely. He's definitely one of the guys who was only it's sort of headphones only or my computer speakers only, because the family stereo, it gets shouted at. Turn that off.
Yeah, exactly. That's just noise.
Exactly.
Yeah, I get it. Okay, so Chet and Atkins and Zappa to start it off. I'm liking this. Okay, so my number.
A test to the test here, this idea that we are brothers from another mother. I just have a feeling we're going to diverge, but
I can already tell we're going to diverge. Well, maybe not. My next one might be up your alley a bit. And really, it's their debut album and then the double album they released, their second real big releases. But it's just the brilliance of that first debut album, and I think some of the brilliance of those two subsequent albums keep them in my top 10. And my number 9 is Guns N' Roses.
All right.
I think Welcome to the Jungle, is just unbelievable as an entire album, but also the song itself sort of changed the way hair metal was viewed. Because if you remember, a lot of the hair metal was Bon Jovi and it was Stryper and Cinderella, and it had a lot of pop elements to it. And then Guns N' Roses comes out with Welcome to the Jungle and basically just said, nope, not going to do it. We're going to be a hardcore heavy metal band, but we're going to be accessible. Unlike, I think, early heavy metal like Metallica and whatnot, they were accessible right off the bat. And then they followed up with Sweet Child of Mine, and then that was it. I was hooked for the rest of my days.
That's a great choice. I can't imagine I would be able to even get them into my top 20, because there are just so many other acts I like so much.
Oh yeah.
But that's a really strong band. And I wonder, like, that's just raw, that's rock and roll, right? That's what this, right? That's the word that comes to mind for them, for Pearl Jam. And like, I think about them and Guns N' Roses in particular, like, is it that the culture finally caught up and like, all right, this could be mainstream? Because I think they're even more visceral than Metallica and some of those really early bands in some ways,
Yeah, because Metallica always had an opus. Every song was a bit of an opus. It was like 6-7 minutes long, and Guns N' Roses was able to keep it like 4 minutes and under. I don't know. I don't know if it was the message or if the way it was played or just the look of Axl and Slash and what have you, but they hit me right in the good spot and continue to do so. My wife won't listen to them, but so again, they're always my headphone go-to.
Yeah, that would be the headphones only for me too.
Yeah,
that's great.
Exactly. Okay, what are you bringing up at number 8?
Number 8 is a complete 180 from everything I think we've talked about, certainly from GNR. Style Council, and basically anything Paul Weller has ever done. And that for me is freshman year of college, my freshman roommate, Rick Donaldson. introduced me to this music that was it was rock and roll, right? Still, I don't know if I would call it visceral, but it was angry and it was hard rock and stuff. It was so different than the staples of classic rock radio that I'd grown up with. And that, that's what, Long Island suburban tract housing kid that I am, or was, still am. I just wasn't exposed to that, in the way that at this point, I'm not sure even why, but this was just so eye-opening and open to, to all those, I don't know if you call them British invasion or later British invasion or second wave or whatever not even new wave.
New wave.
Yeah. It seems a little different than that. And,
well, they were the first combination, I think, because actually I was listening to First Wave on Sirius XM and they came on the other day.
Oh, really?
And now that you mention that, they were the first ones that I think combined both punk and sort of new wave and rock. I mean, because you couldn't fit them into, say, they were just this, or this. They were a whole combination.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. And still one of my favorite bands. Just fantastic. I've got a Spotify playlist that must be 4.5 hours long of just Paul Weller tunes. All over the map. So. Yeah,
because he went on, he did a lot of stuff outside of Style Council. That's where I really found him, was outside of Style Council. Some of his stuff outside of that. So good choice. I'm liking your list. List. All right, my number 8 could be the quintessential new wave band. I don't think they get the respect or the due that they deserve, and they're going pretty strong. They got a new album coming out soon, 40 years on, and I'm not ashamed to admit I am one of their fans. Is Duran Duran?
Wow!
So we go from GNR to Duran Duran.
I was just going to say, I don't think I'm going to be able to top that for a whipsaw back and forth.
Yeah, just a bit different of a listening experience on that one. But I've always been, I think part of it started because they were the first ones really to take advantage of early MTV and turn the videos into an experience.
Yeah.
I'll be honest, I remember the first time seeing Girls on Film, and luckily there were no parents there because I would not have been able to watch MTV from there on out. The suggestiveness, even today, the suggestiveness of that video would make some people blush. But they just used the videos perfectly. And then as subsequent albums went on and it really became about the music, I think they just stuck to their guns. And I've enjoyed all but one album. There is one album that I have that I cannot stand, and I've only listened to it maybe 2 or 3 times. And it just sits there and gathers dust. But the rest of them are really good. And the last album they put out, Paper Gods, was actually one of their best. So I'm excited to see what new music that they have coming up.
So this 40th anniversary album is new material. It's not.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. They put out Paper Gods 17 or 18. And the first song of Paper Gods is the first time I think they've really explicitly, because sometimes you have no idea what the lyrics mean, so you add your own interpretation, which I think they like. But this one was hammering home on the on sort of the pseudo celebrity objective of social media and what have you. So it was a really good song, and I give it a listen. People have to give it a listen because they're really good.
The minute the first Duran came out of your mouth, I had a picture of the video for Rio.
Oh yeah.
Mind. The sailboat, right?
Yep. And the girls getting splashed by the colored water and whatever. Yeah. See, it takes you back.
Yeah, absolutely. That's beautiful.
Okay, we got 7.
All right, number 7. Definitely very different than Duran Duran, but another repeat in the name. It's B.B. King.
Oh.
I can remember buying live at Cook County Jail, live at Cook County. I can't remember the exact name of the album, but when I was visiting my father in Westchester, when he lived there, and they're just so fantastic. Another guitar god, and it was a realization that it's not how fast you can play, how loud you can play, how many notes you can squeeze in, but what the tone and what you're saying and phrasing, and it's just for someone playing the guitar, it's hard not to say that there's a debt to be paid to BB King. And I have this fantastic memory of has to have been senior year in high school. I went and saw him with Bobby Blue Bland opening at this place called Westbury Music. Westbury, I can't remember, Westbury Music Theaters, something
Was
like
it
that.
Music Hall?
Westbury Music Hall, maybe that's it.
Yeah, I think that's what it is.
It's like a 3,000 seat
Yep.
arena on Long Island. In the round, the stage turns while you're sitting there, and it was packed. And me and the two friends I drove there with, I think we're the only white faces in the audience.
Yeah.
Which we grew up in a not very integrated or diverse community. It was eye opening, and it was just this great concert.
His voice too. As soon as you say BB King, all I can hear is that deep rasp of his voice that I think he used as well as anybody who's ever sort of sung that style of blues and mixture of soul music. He had such a distinctive voice when he was singing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think he's one of the few guys that I think of him like there's just no one who sounds like him, and no one I don't even think anyone tries. It's like every once in a while I'll have a WBGO playing or something, and I'll be like, this is either Miles Davis, a track I don't know, or it's someone trying to sound like Miles Davis. Like there's a lot of guys who try and sound like him. He's really distinctive too. But BB King, I can't even think of anyone who's even close. And
but that's what I mean. His voice, his voice the moment you hear it.
That's fascinating.
By the way, there is a theme. We now know even if you hadn't said it before, we now know what instrument you play just based on the first four.
Let's see. There's at least one more guitarist on the list.
Okay.
I think I've shot most of my guitarists now.
All right. Well, now I'm really intrigued. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So
let's go.
My number 7, and one of the members of this band actually, in his solo work, created the first song or recorded the first song I ever became obsessed with. And my number 7 is the Beatles. And I didn't discover the Beatles as the Beatles until I heard Paul McCartney and Wings and Band on the Run.
Wow.
And Band on the Run became the first song I ever became obsessed with. The woman who used to watch me when I was a little kid, her son had the album and he played it. And I made him replay that song until he wore the needle out on the album, on the record player, because whatever it was about the song, again, the construction of it, the build of it, and McCartney's voice. And then that's when he introduced me to the Beatles. And then I've just been a fan of the Beatles ever since and continue to be. Rubber Soul, I keep going back as to, Revolver or Rubber Soul could be, they're both in my top 10, but I'm not sure which album is my favorite. Because they really are. I mean, they really were just incredible. And then to finish it off, my stepmother is a concert pianist. And she talks about the Beatles all the time because she said the Beatles song construction has so many elements of classical music incorporated into it, whether by mistake or whether on purpose. She thinks it happens too often to be by mistake. But she says they're the band that you can listen to as pop band that has classical music built all into it in terms of the song construction and whatnot. So I thought, okay, if she gives the thumbs up, then I know they're a good band.
And they are.
Yeah, they are. Yeah.
And they're not on my list. I'm not a huge fan. Am I the only guy who's not, there was always that thing when, you either love the Beatles or you love the Stones.
Stones.
Yeah, I'm not. Yeah, I don't.
Well,
Either one.
the Stones isn't anywhere on my list, but they do have my favorite song of all time.
Really?
Yes. And I'm going to leave it there in case you and I do an episode of songs, but I'm just going to leave it there. The Stones have my favorite song of all time.
All right. That's an excellent teaser for
Yeah, exactly.
upcoming episode. Cool. All
Okay,
right.
Sarah, to finish out the bottom five, give us number six.
All right. Probably the least well known, so she's certainly not an unknown, but the least well known of the 10 on my list is Abby Lincoln.
Oh, I do not know her.
She's a jazz vocalist. She was an actress as well, and a bit of an activist too, sort of back in 50s and 60s. And I'll talk later in some of the top five about, my introduction to jazz and how huge jazz is for me, and why I love it and everything. But it was a long time I was not into vocal jazz at all. I didn't like it. It didn't speak to me in any way. And there's no denying, Ella Fitzgerald and Billie Holiday and Sarah Vaughan, even, they're great, great singers, and I love them all. But it was Abby, something about Abby. And it was relatively late in her career that I saw her live in New York, and she was touring behind this album called A Turtle's Dream. And it had some originals and some covers, and this fantastic young piano player named Rodney Kendrick, who is definitely in my top 20, but I couldn't put him in my top 10. So yeah, she's up there because that reintroduction or introduction or expansion from just straight ahead instrumental jazz into vocal jazz. And from there, the Great American Songbook, which, is just so many great, great songs, so fantastically constructed and so inventive lyrically, and, the Cole Porters of the world and all, just fantastic stuff. So I had to include Abby as
well. She just got to start because I don't know her, and I'm going to check her out, and I can email you about her once I give her a listen.
All right, great. All right.
So I will say this: one of the women who didn't make my top 10 list, but I think has her voice is the most distinctive in all of music, male or female, is Nina Simone.
Yeah.
I love listening to her. I mean, just what she can do with that instrument is unbelievable. And the feeling that she evokes, whether she goes soft, hard, it didn't matter. So I'm interested to see.
The simplest of piano accompaniment, maybe a small kit drummer behind her. She did so much, Nina.
Yeah. Yep. Okay, so rounding out my top six, I go back to the hard rock genre. Again, a group that I like, but maybe not as popular as a lot of people, or a lot of people will look down on them, is a group called Godsmack out of Boston, led by Sully Erna. I've liked them since their debut album, appropriately titled Godsmack. There are rumors about how they got their name and whatnot. You can go look it up online and figure it out which version you believe and whatnot. But both from the albums they put out and then the shows that they put on, I was hooked. And I used them almost more than Guns N' Roses for my adrenaline rush. Because again, the constructions of the song can be somewhat repetitive, but that repetitive nature of it just hits my ears the right way, gets the right reaction out of it, and I'm off and running. So Godsmack rounds out my bottom five.
All right. So did they have one really big hit? Because I definitely know the name, but I can't think of a song.
Well, I mean, they've had a bunch of different hits. They had, if they did the song that was used in the Scorpion King with The Rock called I Stand Alone. They had Speak might be their most well-known one. But if you look them up, if you heard some of them, you'll recognize some of them. Even if you don't follow the genre and what have you, eventually you'll run into a song that you've heard before, because they too have been around for 20 plus years now. And so they pop up everywhere at some point.
Cool. All right.
Okay, now we're into the top five. Now we're into the real tough one. In fact, I might switch some of mine. No, I won't switch them. They are what they are right now.
Yeah, we're at the tough choices now. There's
Yeah.
a lot of. So number five for me is my introduction to jazz, and that's Dave Brubeck.
Heck,
Not uncommon, right? He, I think, gets some flack, I think undeservedly, from critics and sort of the cognoscenti about being too accessible and I don't know, simplistic in some ways. And I think it's a pretty common thing. There are a lot of folks who like, oh yeah, Dave Brubeck and that Time Out album in particular, that was the introduction. And I had an uncle who, my mother's brother, who was huge into jazz, and that every family gathering that was at their house, there was jazz on, and so that was where I was introduced to it. And so listening to that, it was definitely accessible to me as a, I don't know,
right.
when I started 12, 13, 14 years old, but you dive deeper into it, and I'm not sure, what someone with real music theory knowledge would say, but like that album, there are all these crazy time signatures and just all sorts of crazy stuff going on. That's, I don't know, how do you, like, if it's accessible and it's that complex, then that's, you can't knock it for that.
Right.
That's
well, then that's genius, isn't it? I mean, isn't that the definition of genius, that you take something complex and everybody can sort of get it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to make a plug for one of my favorite YouTube channels. If you're into music theory at all, this guy Adam Nealy, Neely, I think. Do you know the channel?
Yeah, because I go back and forth between him and Rick Beato on what
Rick
makes
Beato.
this song great and whatnot. Rick Beato takes more of sort of pop music and popular music and sort of breaks it down. But
yeah, and Adam gets more into structure and theory and stuff.
Yep.
Even I'm pretty into that, and I know just enough to be dangerous. And sometimes in videos I'm like, all right, you're way over my head, and I'm not a professional musician or aspiring to be one. So I'm gonna go watch another Rick Beato instead. But I'm cool. That's cool that you listen to it as well.
Well, I have absolutely no musical talent. In fact, this water bottle probably has more musical talent than I do. But I just love listening to people who can break it down and tell you why it is the way it is, or what makes this a great song or a good song or something unique. And it sort of trains you to listen differently, or allows you to listen differently, because it takes a song that you thought you knew and all of a sudden there's this underlying tone that you missed entirely. And you go back and you listen to the song like it's brand new. So I do like that a lot. And listen to it a lot. But I do like Brubeck. I mean, I'm not huge into jazz, but I do like him. And I have no problem with simple, as you can tell by my list. I like accessible because it's what I like. And so critics be damned. You have your flavor, I have mine. So, okay. So my top five, this is a band that's been around for a while, probably not known by many people who are going to listen to this unless I reach a much wider audience. But I discovered them because their video was on one of the TVs at a Crunch gym when I belonged to a Crunch gym in Manhattan. And their video came on and the song came on. And while my wife left the gym, I stood beside the treadmill to listen to the rest of it so I could get who the artist was. And since that moment, I've been obsessed with this group. And so my number five is a group called Silver Sun Pickups. And it's a quartet out of LA, well, at least Southern California, in the LA area. They are alternative / psychedelic / rock and roll, and everything that they put out, I've just gobbled up. I listen to on repeat, and they probably have, one of their albums is definitely in my top five. Swoon is definitely in my top five albums of all time. And so the other interesting tidbit about that is that they played 2 shows at Brooklyn Steel in early March or late February of 2020. And that was the last live show I've seen, were those 2 nights. And I mean, I went with friends on the second night and I went by myself on the first night. And they are an amazing live band as well. They're just so good at what they do. So if you got a chance, just check out Swoon and let me know what you think.
All right, I'll definitely check them out. That's a second band you've mentioned that I don't know at all, never heard of, and I don't think the DNV was that DNV Nation.
Nation, yep.
Yeah, that doesn't sound like it's up my alley, but
probably not. But give it a listen just to say that you've listened to it. So if you're going to listen to one DNV album, it's either Future Perfect or Matter and Form. You can that's in the middle of their career. The one I got hooked on was one before that, but I think those two, give a listen to them, and I think those are 2 of their high point albums. So you can give a listen to one and let me know.
We can have a whole long discussion sometime too about why I love and why I hate. Well, I was about to say Spotify, but streaming in general, and like it's another time,
because or else we're going to keep everybody here for days, because you and I could go on for days about this, I guarantee. Okay, number 4.
All right, we are clearly entering the jazz section of my list. Number 4 is Coltrane.
Okay.
Live at Birdland album, which I don't, I think I love Supreme, and there are a couple of others that most people I think would rank above, in terms of his best work. But Live at Birdland, I discovered, and from the beginning, it opens with Afro Blue, and it's, like this really long cut, and it's this incredible raw power, and Elvin Jones is just going just bonkers on the drums, and it was this revelation to me, and it. To realize later that it wasn't, just this, chaos and mayhem, and, that there was real method to the madness, that there was music, theory, ideas, concepts that they were, working out and that existed, in the studio or that's a live album, but, existed as they were, rehearsing it. And then they're like, all right, now we're just going to go with it. And they have this incredible interplay. Like, to me, that just the epitome of jazz and why I love jazz, and it just the fact that all that's still going on, it still blows my mind. It's really fantastic. So
it's hard to overestimate how important jazz is to actually all forms of music that most people can identify with, because a lot of the discipline that comes out of jazz eventually melds its way over to other musical art forms. You just don't know it because they're taking little bits and pieces of it now instead of the whole thing. I do have to say, I'm not huge into jazz except for one gentleman who I love to listen to, and that's Thelonious Monk. He was on my list didn't make my top 10. But if I had to pick, and you could go Miles Davis, you can go Coltrane, but Thelonious Monk on a piano for me is kind of how I envision somebody in New Orleans just sitting down in a small bar or cafe and being able to bang out something that people are going to sit there and just listen to all night. Okay, good one. I like Coltrane a lot. Okay, my number 4 used to be my number 1 for a long time.
Fallen.
Well, no, not fallen. It's just that they had a very brief career, but it was remarkable. And the bands ahead of them had a longer career, so there was more material for me to get hooked into. So my number 4 is The Police. And again, their album Regatta de Blanc is in my top 5 of albums of all time. And talk about a pop group that stole from every genre that you can think of. And Sting, while he's into adult contemporary the last 20 plus years or what have you, is no denying that he he's somewhere along the terms of genius when it comes to musical structure and how to craft a song and build it up and whatnot. I think he doesn't necessarily get his due, but the Police, from their first album to Synchronicity, they were magical. And I go back and I listen to them on a very regular basis because you just kind of miss how beautifully crafted some of their songs are. And so they used to be my number one, but being at number 4 is no shame.
Well, they're definitely just outside the top 10 for me. So we're maybe there's hope that we are truly.
We'll see. We'll see.
And it's funny because it's all the acrimony between them. Stuart Copeland is, in my mind, the best drummer in rock and roll. Right? I mean, just so. And
second. Second.
And who is it? Neil Peart? Is that?
Yeah.
Dude? It's predictable. No one ever agrees with me. They're always like, he's second or maybe third.
Actually, I think Copeland's third because I am a big John Bonham fan. So
really, all right.
I'm a big Zeppelin fan. So,
but I think you're right that as much as all the animosity in the band, and I just hated Sting because I liked Stuart Copeland, and Andy Summers is one of the more interesting guitar players in the history of rock and roll. But all that work, and then was the Blue Turtle or something that
Dream of the Blue Turtle, his first solo album
with Brent. Can I tell you a bathroom story? Real quick?
Sure.
I had Nick tickets for years and years and years down on the floor. So you'd walk out and the bathrooms down there, if you go, they wouldn't be super crowded. And so one day I'm in the bathroom, while the play is going on. So there's no one in the bathroom. And 2 guys walk in, and I don't look up, but they end up not right next to me, on either side of me, a couple of urinals away. And I'm listening to them have a conversation. God damn it, I don't want to look up, but they sound really familiar. Long story short, it was Sting and Branford. And I'm like, good Lord.
Well, that's true, because Branford did play on the first, at least Dream of the Blue Turtles. I don't believe he played on Nothing Like the Sun. Or maybe he did play on both of them. But I mean, Sting had an amazing band for those first couple of albums, and then he kind of drifted off into the adult contemporary and didn't bring in new musicians. But those first 2 solo albums, again, talk about stealing from jazz and whatnot. They were definitely jazz influenced.
And those early Police albums were, it was like ska and punk and reggae stuff. And they were really like nothing else. And they're fantastic. Those first 3 albums were really fantastic, I thought.
Yep. Okay. Right. We're into the metal category. So who gets your bronze?
So the bronze is yet another example of us being brothers from another mother. It is Mr. Monk himself. I'm still shocked. This is why I looked at the list this morning. I was like, this list is terrible. How could I put this list together? Because it doesn't have Miles on it. And I don't know how I didn't put Miles on it, but I didn't. Right. Even just that one album, and he deserves it for all. But anyway, Monk, for years and years, I walked around thinking that Coltrane was my favorite jazz player. And one day I realized, no, it's not. It's Monk. And the beauty in things being a little less, I don't know, the right word isn't polished or perfect. It's, I don't know, just embracing the unexpected and things, some, dissonance kind of working its way into assonance or whatever, it's just so incredibly beautiful, whether it's him with, actually, this is funny. The first album of his I ever bought is an awful album of his called Who's Afraid of the Big Band Monk?
Right.
It's an album with a big band. It didn't make any sense. But
that's on my streaming, on my Amazon streaming, whatever. Yeah. I
still listen to it, but I think if you go to All Music or something, they'll be like 0 stars. This album's terrible. But in any setting, whether it's just him and a piano, there's this album, I think it's just called Live in San Francisco, which there's some crazy story that he had a night off and some kid who in a local high school found out that a show had gotten canceled or something. So he somehow went to his hotel and said, hey, would you come play at our high school concert tonight? And Monk did in like some high school auditorium.
Wow.
Or something. I'm sure I'm getting the details of the story wrong, but parts of it were recorded, and the recording was unearthed in the last 5 years or something. And
I got to look that up because that's great.
I'll try and find it. Maybe I might be wrong. So, but
well,
yeah.
and the reason why I like Monk so much is that, and maybe it's because of the piano and the capabilities of a piano, but it just seems to balance everything else that's going on. I don't know if it's just his playing or the piano itself or what have you, but sometimes in jazz, at least to my ears, things, to your point, things get a little bit too focused on one instrument, and it doesn't seem to be balanced to what's going on. It seems to be like, okay, we're going to highlight the drums, we're going to highlight the sax or the trumpet or what have you. But every song that I listen to by Monk, there just seems to be balance of it. And I just think it's because of the way he plays the piano so well. But that's me. Again, that's how my ears interpret it.
All right. You're bronze.
Number 3. It's the reason why I said Stuart Copeland is number 2, though I will say this, Stuart Copeland's the hardest drummer I think I've ever heard. I mean, he hits the drums harder than I think anybody's ever hit him in that I've ever heard. But my number 3 is Rush. And that the sounds that a trio can make got redefined with them over their career. And then they were the first band to where the lyrics became really important to me, to where I listened to the lyrics as much as I listened to the music itself. And you made mention of it earlier about being a kid from the houses in Long Island and what have you. And Neil Peart writes about that. And he talks about that. And that was the thing. They went across the board and weren't afraid of being big and bombastic and being smart. I mean, when you listen to Subdivisions, it's really smart. And when you listen to Red Barchetta about his uncle's home and the red car and whatnot, it's just smart the way it's constructed and the way the music builds around it and what have you. So, I mean, I've listened to them since the early 80s. I found them by accident. I found them in their synth stage and went back and forth on since then. But for me, their entire catalog is fantastic. And I will say this, that when I was totally flabbergasted when they said Neil Peart died last year. I mean, just totally flabbergasted because one, he's so private, but two, it just out of the blue, they announced, and I should have known right then and there that 2020 was going to suck terribly.
I hit a lot of hard.
Yeah.
So, this is, I'm really excited now to hear your 2 and 1 because Rush just seems like the perfect top band based on the what is it, 6 before it.
Right.
So that's really cool. And this is a nice segue into my number 2, if I might. That you mentioned lyrics and paying attention to lyrics and how that became a thing. And so my number 2 is Paul Simon for very much that reason. There's this he stands head and shoulders above some other guys who I think of not all as equals, but in the same vein, right? Dylan is, the poet of a generation.
Sure. The singer-songwriter, basically.
Yeah. And, that storytelling, the power of adding music that, adds this emotional weight to poetry, right? To being able to tell a story effectively, which I won't even bother going into the whole, marketing tie-in and, how this informs my professional life. But, so Paul Simon is, there's that wistfulness to so many of his lyrics and to the music that, melodies he builds around them. So he's my favorite, but, Springsteen, Billy Joel, who I'm sure I'll get into for adding, but I'm a Long Island boy. So the fact that I mentioned Springsteen is, a little bit of I'll get in trouble for that too from my.
Well, that's okay. Hey, it's your list. Screw them.
I'll even throw, Bob Seeger. There's.
Oh yeah, he's the one. He's not to interrupt you, but I am going to because he's one of the acts that I regret not seeing live.
Yeah, me too.
I would have loved to have seen Seeger live. He's fantastic. And all anybody remembers him for in some generation is Risky Business and Tom Cruise sliding out in his underwear. Bob Seeger, he's on the list. He didn't make the top 10, but he's on my list because I think you're right from a lyrical standpoint.
There's some of these guys, I like Billy Joel and Bob Seeger both there. If you can get past the really big hits, a lot of which I don't like that much, to the mid catalog stuff, man, some really great songs in there, I think.
I agree. And it's kind of funny. You start with Chet Atkins, who lyrically told stories, but in a much different vein than Paul Simon told stories. But they both told, they were both telling stories within 3 minutes. And they were clear as day as to what stories they were telling.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. All so right. My number 2 is the star man himself, David Bowie.
All right.
Bowie dying, well, I knew he'd been sick for a while, but him passing away, that was just like a gut punch, especially since his last 2 albums were just fantastic. I mean, they ranked up there with any that anybody could put forth in the 70s and his early catalog. They were just fantastic. And so, but I mean, I've been a fan of his. Really, I came later. Let's Dance is really my initial exposure. I knew his songs before. I knew Heroes. I'd heard him on the radio and what have you, but I really hadn't explored him. And then Let's Dance hit, and again, accessibility. And I thought, okay, well, I know his other songs. And then I started going back and went and bought older cassettes. And this is back when you bought music on cassettes and whatnot. And just became, again, fanatical about his music and everything he's done and whatnot. And I just think, as far as somebody who was so different and then they talk about him as evolving. And he was different every time. Every album was different. I mean, he did 80s pop albums and whatnot. And then this is the same guy who does Heroes and then comes out with Black Stars, his last album, and Lazarus and whatnot. So
started in The Elephant Man on Broadway.
Right, exactly. I mean, and not only musically, but acting wise. I mean, he always played, The Hunger, if you remember that, and where he played a vampire and whatnot. I mean, he was a quintessential artist in every sense of the word, and he wore it proudly. And so he's number 2 on my list.
Nice. That's very nice. I'm going to do a shout out to my Tuesday LinkedIn posts, which are always some piece of trivia, not always musical.
Oh, yeah.
But one of the first ones I did whenever I started it at some point during the pandemic was that David Bowie doesn't really have 2 different color eyes. He's, it looks like he's got a blue eye and a brown eye.
Right.
You know why?
Yes, because he got hit as a kid and his one pupil was permanently dilated. And so it always looked like it was a different color from the other one because it would never close or open. And I always found that amazing in bright light that it didn't, how could you see? And I'm wondering if it also reduced the amount of light that actually was able to get in, but
maybe your eye just adapts or something.
Maybe it naturally started to filter the light a little bit better. Now the real trivia question is, what's his real last name?
Jones.
Exactly. But because of Davy Jones from the Monkees, he changed his name so as not to be confused and whatnot. So,
the Monkees. I love that TV show.
Oh, so did I. I mean, the opening of the Monkees TV show, I still sing and still do the walk Sometimes my wife and I, when we're walking, we'll do the monkey's walk, as we call it,
really
just
fun.
the horse around. Okay,
Yeah.
I'm very excited.
Number one,
We've
I don't think it's
reached
going to be a surprise to you based on who's not on the list in our earlier conversations, but number one for me is The Who. Today, tomorrow, yesterday, it's always going to be The Who. That you talked a little bit about this with Rush. Yes, they had a separate singer, but they're basically a power trio with a singer tacked on, and Entwistle's just amazing talent, and what that freed Townsend to do,
Right.
and the fact that he really never needed to take a solo and still added so much energy to those songs, and just the interplay, and Keith Moon being Keith Moon, just and honestly, it's Townsend's songwriting. That's
what I was going to say. Talk about a songwriter. I mean, Townsend is spectacular, and even in his solo stuff, which most people don't know, his solo stuff is just as good as anything that the Who did.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's how our conversation started, because I said the Who was just outside my top 10, and you called me a blasphemer. And so
I'll take that back, but I was a little hurt.
I can understand that. I can understand that. And the Who, I mean, they really are. Forget the CSI shows, which which borrowed liberally from the Who and whatnot. They really are. And Daltrey, I think Daltrey, because he didn't contribute anything sort of musically, gets undervalued sometimes. But his voice, even today, he's taking care of his voice. His voice is fantastic. I mean, outside of Rod Stewart, maybe, is the quintessential rock and roll voice.
Yeah, he's up there. Eddie Vedder, I think, deserves mention in that group. But yeah, he's one of the iconic voices of rock. Yeah. So,
okay.
There you go.
It's a good number one. It's a good list. I'm liking the list. So, because this is my show, I cheated with number one.
You have two of them.
No, I don't. Well, technically I have three of them, but they're all combined around one person.
Okay.
This one person is part of three separate musical acts. And I didn't want to break them up, because I want to give credit to this guy, because he's the commonality among them. And it's Maynard James Keenan. And so the groups are Tool, A Perfect Circle, and Pussifer, with Tool being at the top. I mean, Tool probably is my number one musical act, but I'm going to wrap Maynard James Keenan around all of it. Tool for me is the quintessential hard rock band who actually does things musically. They absolutely have to understand theory, change in timing. I mean, if you listen to the drum, the guitar, and the bass and whatnot, sometimes you can't figure out which one is which, the way they play it and the way they intertwine and they play off of each other. And then Keenan's voice is just, it's a magical act, how he's able to do different singing styles among all three of the bands and what comes out. And he's pitch perfect each and every time. So I couldn't break off the other two, even though they probably together separately, they wouldn't be in my top 10, and Tool would still be number one, but I decided to cheat and just put Maynard James Keenan at the top as my number one musical act. And if you haven't heard any of them, just start with Tool and work your way through their catalog.
Tool I have heard of. The other two I do not know, so I'll definitely have to go take
That's okay. As long as you've heard of Tool and you go listen to something like Lateralis or even their latest one. So it's funny, I don't know if you get the same experience. Sometimes when I listen to a band that I really like and I listen to their new material, I have a negative reaction upon first listening because it's not something else that I liked. So they've explored, they've grown, they've decided to do something different. And I was like that with the most recent album that came out a couple of years ago called Fear Inoculum. And then I started listening to it more and more. And I realized, man, you're a dope, because this is just brilliant. I mean, the whole thing of it was just brilliant. And so I don't know if you get the same reaction, but I try to stop doing that now, because I realize I'm missing out on the joy even of the first listen when I react that way.
Yeah, no, I do try, and especially when someone comes out, I try and listen to it before I read the reviews or listen to some DJ waxing negative or positive about it. I want to hear it decide. Yeah, it's sometimes it's hard because you have this picture in your mind, like, hey, this is what these guys sound like, and this is what I want them to sound like, and but it's good to grow. So that's cool that you went back and listened to it, because that's for another conversation, but that's
I have a feeling we could do a whole series on music and whatnot. Maybe we will. Maybe I will hijack you and we'll do a series on music.
Right. Well, this has been so much fun. I'm in. I'm absolutely in.
So now I have one final question. Give us 3 that didn't make the top 10, but came close.
Let's see. 2 of them are easy. The Police we talked about, and Miles we talked about. Who would be a third? I'd really have to give some thought to who I would add as number 13. There are lots of folks that are awfully close. I'm going to stick with those 2 for now. How about you? Who's that close?
So I did do, I have way more than just 3. I don't want to show everybody my phone, but I do have way more than 3. But on my list, again, I'm cheating. Jack White. So in all of his incarnations, I kept going back and forth. I almost knocked Guns N' Roses off and put him on and whatnot. And so maybe next week I will on there. A group called Porcupine Tree. And they've been around for a long time. Steve Wilson, again, he's done solo and Porcupine Tree. If you ever get a chance, this album's in my top 10, maybe my top 5. Fear of a Blank Planet.
Okay.
It's just a phenomenal album, but all their albums are phenomenal, and their musicianship is second to none. I mean, just unbelievable how they craft songs and what they do. And then my next one was sort of, not sort of it wasn't a tie with Jack White. I wasn't going to go back and forth. He's definitely outside my top 10, but Prince. I mean, Prince, for me as a guitarist, and you as a guitarist, is one of my favorites. And having seen him live and see what he can do with that instrument, it was not his gyrations, just musically with the instrument. He's phenomenal, and all his songs are. And his song, Sign of the Times, is one of my favorite of all time, because telling a story in a particular way, it's just brilliant.
Yeah, he definitely, I'd have to put him up there. Clapton and Carlos Santana, I'd have to add up there. And yeah, you're absolutely right about Jack White. I don't know him very well, but and it's only in the last couple of years that I've come across him. Man, that's real rock and roll.
Yeah. I mean, and he sticks to what he likes, and he's got, you always know it's a Jack White sound. Yeah. He's just so identifiable. And he was in the documentary, It's Gonna Be Loud, with Jimmy Page and The Edge. And I don't know, he was in the backwoods, maybe of where he lives outside of Nashville in Tennessee. He grabbed a couple pieces of wood, a couple of nails, and a couple of wire strings, nailed it together, wrapped the strings, and then just knocked out a song, a 1 minute, minute and a half song. And he's playing the strings on this board and what have you. And I just thought, dude, you're definitely, you were touched by the gods. So appreciate it.
Not fair that you're walking here amongst us.
Yeah, exactly. Or I can't just touch you and take a little piece of it, just a little piece of it. But Yeah, so he was probably the one just outside the top 10.
Cool.
If I redid the list. Well, this was fantastic, Andy.
Absolutely.
So Andy's link to his business is down below, but so is Andy's list. If you want to check out the artists and the musical acts he mentioned, you're not going to be shortchanged. And the fact that I don't know Abby Lincoln excites me to go listen to her, and so that we could start a further conversation down the road. And you could call me a blasphemer when I mention something else or whatnot outside of my top 10. But this was great. Thanks for doing this, sir.
My pleasure, Sean. A lot of fun. Do it
Okay.
anytime.
So everybody, you've been watching Did You Know That? ? Again, that is Andy Schulkind. And you know what? I got to say, either list down below, we definitely want to hear comments, because this is the kind of topic that gets people riled up. So try to keep it a little bit clean, but we are an adult channel. So you're more than welcome to wax poetic as to whether or not you disagree with us or agree with us. So for Andy, my name is Sean O'Rourke. You've been watching Did You Know That? Hit subscribe with the bell. And until next time, everybody out there in the ether, you be well.